Hey everyone, me again, plugging the YouTube channel. We're having such a good time doing these hot takes. Scott didn't think he'd like it that much, and he's actually volunteering to do them all the time. So that's a pretty big deal. We would love it if you would subscribe and be part of our community. We read the comments, we take them to heart, not the really mean ones, but we're trying to build something special here at Raging Moderates, and we'd love for you to be a part of it. So please subscribe.
Please hit subscribe for more hot takes.
Welcome to Raging Moderates. I'm Jessica Tarlov, and today I'm joined by my friend and co-host of The View, Alyssa Farah Griffin. Alyssa, thanks for joining me. How are you doing?
I'm good. It's so good to see you, and thank you for having me. I'm such a fan of the podcast, so I'm very honored to be here.
Well, we're fans of yours, and I think Scott has made semi-inappropriate comments about you, but I'm going to keep it clean.
We expect that, and we want that from Scott.
He unleashes the masculine energy. Let boys be boys. You just wrapped up an interview with former Vice President Kamala Harris. I definitely want to talk about that, but first, would love to get your take on, Trump's newest war on Tylenol and the MAHA's movement's broader impact on women. What did you make of yesterday's announcement from the White House?
Yeah, listen, today at the UN, we heard about all the wars he ended, but you're right. He didn't mention the one he started with Tylenol. Listen, I found this concerning. I'm going to go with that. I was in the White House. So for those who don't know, I was Trump's final communications director at the end of the first term. And I was there for the infamous injecting bleach press conference. And this brought back all the feels from that because I had been in the briefing before that public press briefing took place. And the background is that Trump had been briefed on this information that heat and humidity could help kill the coronavirus. It was preliminary. It was not vetted with outside medical groups. We had not sought out the American Medical Association and outside experts to say, okay, what do we do with this information and what do we tell to the public? So I remember arguing behind the scenes, let's not put the president out there. It's not clear what we're recommending to the American public if we give them this information. And it brought back the same feeling because like this information, which you and I both have gone to OBGYNs who have given us completely contradictory information of this, the plurality of data and of current science says that Tylenol is the sole effective pain reliever and fever reducer for pregnant women. So to go out and share this information and then let him kind of freelance around, so don't take it, tough it out, it brought back to mind just the dangers that come when you freelance around something like public health. But what stood out to me is if you read the FDA, the actual statement, the end of it seems to kind of debunk what Trump is actually saying. It's much more cautious in its language. It says there's no causality between Tylenol during pregnancy and autism, and then reiterates that it's the one safe drug for people to take. So all that to say, I thought it was reckless, and I think that it's very likely Trump gave himself this artificial deadline of we're going to have these new findings. And then he's like, all right, give me something. It's half baked. It's from RFK of all people. And then he just put it in front of millions of pregnant women and their spouses who are now totally concerned and not sure what to do with that information.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, causing the most amount of chaos for the least amount of payoff seems to be a trend there. And I thought the same thing about the FDA's actual statement, and it reminded me, as someone who was obviously not within the Trump administration, but watched all of Trump's legal team fan out to courtrooms around the country to try to overturn the election, that they get a little sheepish, right, when they're actually in front of a judge. Yeah. And could be disbarred for their comments versus what they can say in a press conference or on one of their podcasts. And it felt like that contrast to me as well, where the FDA was like, hold on, wait a minute. We can't imperil ourselves at this level. And not just that, I mean, this is people's lives at stake, right? This is our health, and especially our health at the most vulnerable time in our life when we are pregnant and, care so deeply about making sure that this is a safe journey for our tiny passenger, as someone once called it, while I was pregnant. And I was like, this is 40 pounds. This is not that tiny, but I appreciate
passenger.
it. What's your sense of how people are feeling about the MAHA movement? Because this was one of the elements of Trump 2024 that actually brought together, folks from the left over to Trump's side. And RFK was a big part of that.
I think it's incredibly formidable, and you shouldn't discount how popular the broad contours of MAHA are. So we don't trust pharmaceutical companies. We think they're in it for profits, and we think that they're okay with us staying sicker and less healthy because that drives up their margins. Our food has too many additives. Why are things, the same foods, healthier in Europe? You don't gain as much weight. They don't have the same, illnesses that we do. These are all very legitimate claims. And by the way, these are also things that have always been kind of left and right issues that people have cared about. But where I have an issue, and I've said this so many times, is to say that if I care about additives in my food, wanting healthier access to food, and also holding pharmaceutical companies accountable when they need to be, do I also have to give up vaccines that have been life-saving for the last, 50 years on the books? And RFK conflates some very legitimate issues at time that I think are incredibly motivating with moms, with younger women, with kind of a new generation that's more interested in health and wellness and longevity, with some far more dangerous and dubious science when it comes to things like vaccine and like just life-saving, data-driven care that we know works. So I think it's incredibly powerful. I think Trump recognizes that. I think it was a missed opportunity, frankly, for Democrats in the election to not figure out how do you take what you can of RFK without embracing the danger and the crazy to try to get some of those voters to your side. Instead, just kind of doing that, we reject this wholeheartedly. That said, though, on the vaccines of it, there was recently this data that showed that 75% of Republicans support the common vaccines that school children take. This was briefed to Republican senators. It was briefed to the White House, and 83% of Democrats do. The vast majority of this country wants polio, measles, the things we've relied on to still be accessible. So I think RFK and the Trump administration risk overreaching in that space and wildly being out of step with the majority of the country that does not want to see, diseases we haven't dealt with in 50 years coming back the way that we have. So there's a power in organizing to it. There's absolutely some legitimacy to what drives it, in my opinion. But the anti-vax, anti-research, anti-scientific advancement side of it terrifies me. And your family are doctors, aren't they?
No, we just look like it.
Yes,
no, that's not true. I shouldn't say that. My immediate isn't, but
Okay.
yes, extended and
You
like
look like doctors.
like serious ones. Like there's a cyst named after us, the Tarlov cyst, which you could get.
I'll call you if I do.
But yes, we've got doctors. I wish that Democrats had done a better job kind of herding the cats that are RFK and at least giving him some role. I always thought he'd be better off like at USDA or something. Like,
Didn't do quite as much harm. Yeah.
I want to switch gears. Big night. Jimmy Kimmel returns. You addressed this on The View yesterday. Didn't last week. How are you feeling about him coming back and kind of the state of the First Amendment here?
I think it's very welcome that he's coming back. And for the record, The View always planned to address this. Similarly to Colbert, we basically waited a day. You kind of want to give, Kimmel's actually a colleague, being that he's at ABC, but we wanted to give both of them a chance to respond themselves before we kind of jumped out and started speaking on their behalf. But I feel extremely strongly that it goes against every conservative principle I've held deeply my entire adult life, that the idea that you should have the FCC having a heavy hand, even if they're not directly weighing in on who's on air or what opinions they're espousing, but they're doing it in a pretty obvious way by expressing who the president's not happy with, the viewpoints that they're not happy with, all at a time where we know this is a business. We know that companies that want mergers are going to look to what the FCC chairman is saying, and that's going to weigh into what decisions they make. I think it's welcome that he's back. Things that people find unpopular or uncomfortable is the most protected speech. And by the way, political humor and satire has always been among the most protected speech in our country. So I'll be curious what his tone is coming back. I have a lot of respect for Jimmy Kimmel. I'm not in this camp of people who think he's talentless. I think he's hilarious most of the time. But I think it's an overreach of the FCC, and it's also out of step with what Trump ran on. I mean, this was supposed to be, we're bringing back free speech, we're ending cancel culture.
And he signed an executive order to that effect.
Yeah. So what are we doing? And it was interesting. Joe Rogan finally weighed in on it, and I was kind of curious where he'd come down on it. And he was very, very defensive of the First Amendment rights that comedians and personalities in media have to express their viewpoints.
Yeah. I saw that. Very welcome. I think Brendan Carr is really the one that messed up here. Like they could have done this under the radar a lot more, except he wanted to go on a podcast and talk about it.
And I know Brendan Carr a bit over the years. He and I were very ideologically aligned on this issue. If you see his statements from 5 years ago, he was a free speech warrior, a First Amendment absolutist. So I'm just going to hope, I project into the universe what I hope to be true in these trying times. I hope that he got over his skis and that he still believes in the fundamentals that he espoused around just the freedom of speech and how important it is that the government uphold those rights.
Well, I'm usually the biggest Pollyanna on a podcast, so I'm glad to have you hear about it because it seems like Brendan Carr has had a lobotomy. I know we don't do those anymore, but I read in 2019 tweets and defenses of President Biden also as well. I'm kind of like, what happened here? But you had a big day. Vice President Harris was on The View making her triumphant return after what everyone agreed was one of the more disastrous interviews, certainly, that a candidate has had. How did it go? What stuck out to you?
Yeah, I was excited to have her back after a question that was asked by my colleague Sunny Hosted during the election that I think a lot of people thought was a significant turning point in the campaign. She was essentially asked, what would you do differently than Joe Biden? And she said, not a thing comes to mind. And I know I heard it. I don't want to speak for Sunny, but I think she did in the moment. I was like, that's going to be in every Trump campaign ad for the foreseeable future, because 2/3 of the country felt like the country was on the wrong track. 43% of Americans felt like Joe Biden's policies hurt them. Not just they didn't like them, they weren't popular, they actually hurt them. She had to create that distance. So I was looking for today, basically, how much is she looking backward and relitigating the election, and how much is she looking forward? And then I was keeping my eyes out for what policies is she talking about? So is this going to be identity politics, Kamala Harris, or is this going to be cost of living, making life more affordable for Americans? I think she started off with really heartfelt reflections on how hard losing was and just the surprise of that.
I didn't fully appreciate how much people wanted to know there was a difference between me and President Biden. I thought it was obvious. And I didn't want to offer a difference in a way that would be received or suggested to be a criticism.
I remain a little bit surprised that she and her team were as surprised as they were. This to me was going to be a Trump landslide when Biden was in. When she came in, there was this glimmer that somebody might beat him, but most of the polls consistently had him ahead in the swing states. So I'm a little surprised by how surprised her team was. But once she got her stride was in our second segment, when she started talking about how she feels his, first year in office is going, and you feel the passion in it. And she was very effective, the most effective I've seen her at communicating how dangerous she thinks he is for the country.
I mean, what he has done to attack a free and independent press, free speech, what he has done to attack the people of our country in such a vicious way, I find there are no redeeming qualities.
But then I'm still waiting for that other piece. And she got there, which was she talked so much about her biggest lesson from the campaign being everything has to come back to voters' day-to-day concerns around the cost of living.
I do believe one of the biggest deciders of the outcome of that election was that the American people were sick of things being so expensive.
Yes.
And wanted that the prices would come down.
If I were her team, I would have wanted to invert all of that, start with that, hit Trump, and then do a few minutes on what you learned on the campaign trail. But listen, this is clearly a former candidate who spent so much time analyzing those 107 days and thinking about everything could have, would have, should have. I think she took some very wise lessons. I think the fact that she realizes the cost of living and how much people were struggling was the whole ball game was big. I think she didn't take the bait on a question around identity politics and, was it racism and sexism that you lost? There was definitely some reflection that she's had. What did you think? Because you're the Democrat expert here.
I was totally surprised when she said that she didn't realize people wanted differentiation from Biden. I mean, that was the main, what moment for me? Because you say, what was her team briefing her on it? And that's what we were just seeing over and over again. There's a reason that he isn't top of the ticket anymore, and it's because people don't want that. I thought that she had a few really strong answers. What I guess I've found missing so far, and I haven't read the book, and I will, and maybe I'll feel differently once I've gone through hundreds of pages versus excerpts and listening to her already, is, I wanted her to kind of grab that leadership role and to say, I've been there and I know what it's like to have the conversations with the swing voters in these states that are absolutely must win. And this is how they're feeling and this is our path forward. So not necessarily as a candidate for the party, but as someone who's going to have a stewarding role.
Yeah.
And I haven't seen that yet. Maybe by the end of the book tour, it'll come out. But that was really what I was looking for. There was a lot of this one did this to me, this one did that to me. I was in this terrible position. She said she needed more time. And I think maybe there's also an argument for it was the right amount of time or even less time, maybe, because Trump was still super unpopular, right? And people wanted a change agent. And I think there could have been a Democratic change agent that pulled that off.
Yeah, and I still think and I would say this is the case of probably all of the prominent Democrats who've kind of emerged, whether it's Newsom, J.B. Pritzker, to a lesser degree, Governor Moore, but they still lead with their absolute rage and how appalled they are at Trump and his actions rather than, but this is what I'm for and what I'm going to do for you. And I traveled a ton during the election, and voters want to know how you're going to make their life better. The people who are terrified by Trump, who are outraged, who are angry, they're already with you, or they're at least against him and the Republicans. And I'm waiting to see who emerges as that person with a counter message of, this is what we're for. This is what we're going to do. This is the vision for the country. And she's closer to it than the last time she was on, but I didn't feel like she was there today.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's still time for it, but I think that's where, as the campaign actually starts, I think post-midterms, when everyone comes out of their shell a bit more, you'll hear more about, Josh Shapiro, this is what I've delivered for people in Pennsylvania. I mean, right now, Newsom and Pritzker are redistricting, and that's where the fight is. I assume Wes Moore is going to rethink his I'm not running and come out since he wore the Clyburn T-shirt. But I feel like especially these governors are going to talk about what they've delivered. But yes, like you, I'm hopeful and waiting to be hearing more of the action-oriented items versus the Trump did this. Everybody knows Trump did it, and we're amplifying it every day. This was awesome to have you, Alyssa. Make sure you watch The View. She's all over CNN, too. It was great to see you. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.